Hello, and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be turning the clocks back over 60 years to look at the events of New Year's Day, 1960, in Sheffield, England. It was the 1st of January 1960, and the licensing hours at the East House pub on Spittal Hill in Sheffield had been extended for further New Year's celebrations. The pub was busy that evening, with several men gathered around a piano, singing and drinking. Spirits were high amongst the group as they celebrated the start of a new decade. Michael and Donald McFarlane, two brothers in their 20s, were particularly enjoying their evening. Donald had been due to work the night shift at his job at Firth Vickers Steelworks. However, he decided to join his brother at the pub instead. The two brothers, along with their two sisters, Carol and Anne, lived with their parents in Perkin Road, Sheffield. Michael, the youngest brother, is believed to have had a young daughter but was separated from the mother of his child. He also worked locally as a steel worker. Also in the group that evening were Thomas Owen, a soldier in his late 20s, 32-year-old George Morris, a furnace pitman who worked at Firth Brown's in Sheffield, Terry Forrest, Tom Musgrave, and 21-year-old Kenneth Ellis. The group of men were enjoying their evening in the pub when, at about 10:30 p.m, Mohamed Ismail walked into the crowded bar. Mohamed was born in Somalia in 1929. At the age of 23, he moved from Somalia to England and began working at the Royal Infirmary in Sheffield. He then spent some time working in Doncaster, which is about 30 miles from Sheffield, before moving to the Firth Vickers Steelworks. However, he had lost that job and was unemployed at the time. Earlier that day, the 31-year-old is believed to have had a discussion with two women during which he told them how he had wanted to end his own life. He had no money, no job, and no family in the UK. However, he also informed them that if he was to do this, it would go against his religion and he would go straight to hell. Unfortunately, Mohamed believed that he would not go to hell if he were to kill someone and subsequently be executed for this crime. As he walked into the East House pub that evening, he had decided to put his plan into action. He pulled a Smith & Wesson handgun out of his jacket. Kenneth Ellis saw what was happening and, believing the gun to be fake and that Mohamed was pulling a prank, jokingly put his hands up in the air. Mohamed fired and the bullet passed through Kenneth's wrist. The bullet lodged into the wall behind him. Kenneth hastily tried to get away by running to the other bar within the public house. Before anyone had time to react, Mohamed continued shooting. Michael was shot in the chest and died instantly. His brother Donald was shot in the left temple. Thomas and George were also hit. Mohamed raised the gun and aimed his sixth and final bullet. He pointed the gun at Tom's head and pulled the trigger, but the gun, which Mohamed had loaded with the incorrect bullets, jammed. A fellow customer, Bert Drake, recalls initially believing that the gun was part of a prank and continued to play darts when the shooting started. He only realised what was actually happening when he heard screams and saw blood on the victims. Having finished shooting, Mohamed left the bar and went to hide in the outside toilet in the garden of the pub. Bert followed and, together with his brother-in-law Harry Hawke, held onto the toilet door to prevent Mohamed from getting away. Another man, Alf Howarth, armed with a bar stool, was ready to attack if Mohamed should try to make his escape. The emergency services arrived at the scene within minutes of the shooting, and the victims were rushed to the Sheffield Royal Infirmary. This was the same place where Mohamed had previously worked. At the same time, the police arrested Mohamed and he was taken into custody. Thomas Owen and George Morris both died in hospital from gunshot wounds to their heads. Kenneth was treated in hospital for a wrist injury. Fortunately, the bullet passed through his body without doing any lasting damage, and he was able to leave hospital after a couple of days. Donald, whose brother Michael had died at the scene, was in a critical condition after being shot in the head. He underwent a lengthy brain surgery and remained unconscious for 3 months. After he eventually regained consciousness, he was left with severe injuries which would dramatically alter his life. He was unable to recognise his relatives and had a large hole in the side of his head. He had lost almost half of his body weight and would remain in hospital for a further 3 years, during which time he had to learn to walk and talk again. Once he was discharged from hospital, he continued to require assistance, struggling to take care of himself, mainly due to the paralysis of the right-hand side of his body. His mother passed away from a heart attack in 1963, with the remaining family believing that this was caused by the stress of what had happened to her 2 sons and the pressures of caring for Donald. Despite his horrific injuries, Donald managed to work full-time at Remploy Limited. He would get up at 5:30 a.m. each day and catch 2 buses to get to work in time for his shift, which started at 7:45 a.m. Other than his share of a £600 collection that was organised by local pub landlords and Tetley's brewery, Donald did not receive any compensation for his injuries. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme, which later allowed for victims of crime to apply for compensation, wasn't set up until 4 years later in 1964. Prior to this, there was no way for victims of crime to be financially compensated. When he was in his 50s, sadly, Donald died from a brain hemorrhage, which may have stemmed from the extensive injuries that he sustained on the 1st of January 1960. Despite the extreme adversity he faced in his life, he maintained a positive outlook, stating that some people are worse off than me. As for Mohamed, following his arrest, he was remanded in custody and charged with triple murder. He admitted these crimes and seemed content to be sentenced to death for what he had done. When he was asked if he wanted a solicitor to represent him, he simply said, "I don't mind." He was given legal aid in anticipation of his upcoming trial. At Sheffield Assizes on the 25th of February 1960, it took a jury just 15 minutes to determine that he was unfit to enter a plea or to stand trial. He was officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and as such was taken to Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital in West London, where he was detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. This is a term used in the United Kingdom to refer to an indeterminate or undefined sentence. Shockingly, just 2 years later, in April 1962, Mohamed was released from Broadmoor and deported back to Somalia. How or why this happened so quickly is unclear, but we can only assume that he was deemed to no longer be a danger after being treated for his illnesses. It would later transpire that he was most definitely still a danger to society. After completing a prison sentence in Somalia for shooting at a judge who was thankfully unharmed, Mohamed then went on a shooting spree in a village nearby. Several people died before Mohamed was shot and killed by the police. It would seem that he had finally got his wish to die at the hand of another, but not before destroying numerous lives along the way. That concludes today's story. Apologies for the lack of photos in today's story. Please add any comments down below. So this is the last video from me for 2020. So hopefully there are brighter days ahead for 2021. Thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. So today's story was from Sheffield. Did you know at the Sheffield Town Hall it's got its own Walk of Fame? Includes people such as Sean Bean, Jessica Ennis and Sebastian Coe, to name but a few. Happy New Year. Goodbye.